What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
I'm doing my master's in psychology right now, and this blows my mind. Did you know that if you have pre-performance anxiety for something coming up, maybe you're nervous for a presentation or something, you can trick yourself into thinking you're excited rather than nervous by just saying out loud to yourself, I am excited. That's it. That's all it takes. And the reason for it is that both excitement and nervousness are high arousal states. Physiologically, what's happening to you between the two of them is pretty similar. So it's easy to get your brain to reinterpret those signals as excitement rather than nervousness, as compared to telling yourself to calm down, because calmness is a low arousal state. That being said, it shouldn't be that easy, right? Like, as human beings, we should be a little bit more complex than just saying out loud to yourself, I am excited, and it working. So I'd done the research, I'd read the studies. I didn't truly believe it until I tried it a couple days ago. It works.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
So I'm not a social scientist, but I am about to graduate with my bachelor's in psychology. And to this day, the thing that I don't want to accept is the ideas of the proximity effect and also the mere exposure effect, which basically they found that just being around someone more frequently makes people like them more. Like, you'll rate them higher as, like, you like that person more, just from being around them more. And the proximity effect also, like, literally says, like, if you live close to someone, like, the closer someone lives to you and the more frequently you see them, the more likely you are to be friends with them. And, like, we'd all like to think that, like, we like people or we make friends based off of, like, personality. But, like, honestly, a lot of it's just, like, how easy.
Social scientists, what's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you...
So I've talked about this in my psychology class, and honestly, it is the funniest thing ever, so here it is. The bystander effect. Humans love to be overdramatic, and we love to just predict the unpredictable. So when you're thrown into a situation, you're like, oh, I would totally do this, or I would have done that, when in reality, no, you would not. The bystander effect is if you see someone in need of help and there's a group of people around you, you're not going to do anything. It's the diffusion of responsibility. The more people around you, the less likely you are to help. But if someone points at you and says, call 911, or if you're the only one there, you feel like all the responsibility is yours. But you don't want to help. You don't. You want to go back into the crowd. You don't want to be noticed. And that's why groups are so bad.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
Yeah, for me, it's cognitive dissonance, which is basically when someone holds two contradicting beliefs, or the stress someone feels when they do an action that goes against their beliefs. Some examples? Oh yeah, I love animals, but then they eat a cheeseburger. Yeah, we gotta take care of our planet, but then they litter on the beach. Cognitive dissonance is so common. Listen, I'm not saying we should all be perfect, but shouldn't we at least try to align our actions with our moral implications? I mean, that makes sense, right? Also, I'm not a social scientist, but I did study psychology and human behavior in college.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
The fact that if you feel like you're being watched, you're most likely being watched. I don't like that shit. I don't fucking like...
One thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept.
That learning styles aren't a real thing. From an early age, I think we're all kind of taught about visual learning versus auditory learning, and that we all have these preferences for different learning styles that allow us to learn more effectively. But the research actually doesn't support that learning styles and adapting your classroom to learning styles produces better outcomes for students. And actually, research has found that the preferences that we think we have for learning don't often match objective outcomes and what learning styles are actually best for us. And so in order for us to measure our learning styles, we often have to ask people about their preferences for learning. And those preferences don't align with what learning style actually produces better outcomes for us. So if you think you have a learning style that works best for you, I would strongly encourage you to not pigeonhole yourself into that box.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
You ever wonder why the people you wait a really long time to meet on dating apps never really seem to work? Well, there's a reason, and I'm going to tell you why. I studied interpersonal communication and virtual relationships in college. When you move from an online relationship to an in-person relationship, that's called a modality switch. Now, we have an imagined reality in our head, what we think people should be like, typically before we meet them. I think they'll feel like this. I think they'll smell like this. I think they'll sound like this. When we find a good one, we wait a really long time to make sure that it feels right. We want to talk for months before we give them a chance to meet us. However, the longer you wait, the longer you have what is called expectancy violations, things that violate what you thought was going to happen. That lowers what's called uncertainty reduction, meaning you have a higher chance of not doing something. You think this person's going to smell like this and sound like this and act like this, and in reality, they're nothing like what you thought they were going to be. That perception only gets stronger the longer the time. Essentially, the longer you wait to meet, the longer you build them up in your head. They never meet that expectation.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
So there are these things called parasocial relationships, and it's when you have, like, you feel so close to someone that you don't even know, and that person or persona that you've built up in your mind doesn't even know that you exist in return. So it's like our obsession with celebrities or like people we like on Instagram that we see. And I thought I was above this until I saw Keith Powers for the first time, and I was like, oh, so this is what this is like. And I refused to accept it because I thought I was above it. I was like, how can you have such an emotional connection to someone you don't even know? But I did more research, and it's actually healthy because the relationships you form with these people that you don't even know, like these fake relationships you build in your mind, actually help you deal with real relationships you have. Basically, humans are psychotic, and it's okay.
What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept?
It's a little outside economics, but I always marvel at the fact that making an unpleasant experience last longer can actually have it be remembered as better. This paper reports the results of an experiment where men were randomly assigned to 2 different colonoscopy procedures. In one, the men experienced the colonoscopy, which is an unpleasant, invasive medical procedure, and then it ended just as usual. And in the other, the instruments were left inside the body for an additional few minutes. You would think that the additional time in an unpleasant experience would make that experience worse, but instead, the men whose ending was just kind of a dull, general unpleasantness rather than active pain remembered the experience as better overall and were actually more likely to get a colonoscopy again.
One thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept is...
A lot of you guys are doing this thing when you choose your food, yet I guarantee none of you realise you're doing it. And there's been a lot of research that proves this happens. In fact, researchers have to compensate for this natural human behaviour. It's called the attitude behaviour gap, and I'm going to tell you how that changes the food we buy. If we went to a supermarket and did a survey where we asked customers whether their choices were influenced by either environmental concerns, taste and flavour, or just cost, the majority of people would say taste and flavour or perhaps environmental concerns because we all care about plants, don't we? However, if we analyse what people actually buy when they go shopping, we find the majority flips the other way, and most people, they actually make their decisions based on cost or value because people don't want a receipt that's like, ugh! So quite simply, our attitudes that we want good quality food that saves the environment is very different to our behaviour, which is driven by cost.
Social scientists, what's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept is true? Okay, I'll go first. So I study romantic relationships. And did you know that people who live together before getting married have worse marital outcomes than people who do not live together before getting married? When I learned about this in class, I was living with my boyfriend at the time, and I confronted my professor about it, and I said, there's no way that this is true. So basically, when people live together, there are kind of 2 ways that happens, right? You can either slide into living together because you're already spending so much time together. You may as well just move in together, save on rent. Alternatively, you can make the decision to live together and talk about the implications of that moving in together. And people who make that decision have better outcomes than people who just slide into that decision. Let me know if you want to learn more about that. What's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior that you just can't accept? So the last video blew up kind of hard, so I'm back with another one. Something that I just can't accept as true is that affectionate communication actually has physiological health benefits. Just the act of writing a letter that expresses affection to your romantic partner, a friend, a family member has physiological benefits. I'm talking about cardiovascular recovery times, flu recovery times, and cortisol recovery times, meaning your stress hormone response. The best affectionate communication is reciprocal with another person, but just the simple act of expressing affection is enough to have physiological and mental health benefits. So do yourself a favor and write a little love note. Your body will thank you for it. Social scientists, what's one thing that you know to be true about human behavior?
So when I was doing my undergrad in my last year, I did a research project about prevalence and predictors of eating disordered thoughts and behaviors. And I learned that about since the 80s in the field of psychology that being dissatisfied with your appearance, your weight, that type of thing, is known as a normative discontent for women. Because so many of us do it, it's just considered normal for us. Makes you think. So this is also why I refuse to talk about my body in front of my kids. And if I do say anything about my body, it's only positive in front of my girls, because I refuse to accept that for them to have a normal childhood, they're going to learn to hate their bodies. Like, I refuse to accept that.